Flashlight by Susan Choi is on the recently dropped Booker Prize long list, so stick around while I shine a light on this fresh read. Hi, I'm Amanda, and this is Spineless Books, your spoiler-free one-stop shop for all things audiobook. Flashlight by Susan Choi is a rare read for me in that it's one I actually found in a bookstore. I picked up the book and read the blurb and thought, I should probably read that. After I was waiting to get it from the library, Fable just kept putting it in my face every time I started a new read, so ultimately I just bought it with an audiobook credit. It's a historical fiction novel that covers a little-known period of history that I had never heard of. So much so that I actually found myself looking it up and trying to learn more when I finished the book. The book covers the complexities of family, personal identity, navigating loss, all while traveling across continents. It's really quite robust. There are a handful of fascinating main characters, but the book jumps around in time in a really interesting way. We start in the recent past, and then we go to the way back past, and then we come to the present day and continue forward. So we get a little bit of a setup of an event, and then we get the history that led to the event, and then we get the aftermath of the event. I found the structure to be pretty cool. In spite of the jumping around, I found the characters to be really distinguishable from one another. They were each unique, and they were each able to be told apart, even though they felt very strongly to me like a family unit. The structure of the family is a father, a mother, and their young daughter, and her older half-brother, who is her mother's child. The father, Sirk, is really fascinating in that he's Korean by ethnicity, but he was born and raised in Japan until he later came to America, where he met his American wife, Anne. Louisa, mixed race and having been born in America, gets a chance to experience Japan, however. The family spends a lot of time between both countries, the United States and Japan, so we get to see a lot of the cultural conflict and a lot of the cultural differences between the two nations. Sirk is a Japanese-raised Korean who comes to America, so we get to experience his culture shock in the United States. But Anne is from America through and through, so we get to experience her culture shock when they move to Japan. Louise, the child, is sort of just weirdly in between and kind of never at home anywhere. The catalyst of the story is set in the late 70s when Louisa is a young girl. She and her father go out for a walk on the beach in Japan one night, and he's swept away by a wave and never returns. So Louisa and her mom are really sort of left to fend for themselves, and their relationship becomes extremely contentious. Neither of them is really able to be a support system for the other, so they're sort of both on their own. They can't lean on each other the way you would hope family members could during loss. So this is another portrayal of how grief affects people. In this case, it actually drives a wedge. I thought for much of the beginning of the book that I was reading a story about the complexities of a relationship between a mother and daughter after they both experience a loss. But there was a lot more to this story as it turns out. In fact, that was just a small part of the story. The story deals with the complexities of citizenship, what it means to find and build a home, but it also focuses on a little-known period of history that was a great reminder to me that even what seem like minor events in the scope of things can have a major effect on the lives of those that are impacted by them. This may not have been something I had heard of before, and it may not have been something that impacted a ton of people, but for those who were impacted by this event, it was huge, and that's what we're seeing in this story. I've begun to identify that I actually really enjoy when characters are unlikable, on purpose. I think in this story, Susan Choi's writing is really, really successful in writing characters who personally I didn't like, but I was aware that there may be more to their behavior than I was privy to as a reader or listener. So I had to keep going to understand them, and Susan Choi really made me work to get to know these characters. I like the idea that I didn't really care for anybody fully, yet I cared why they were that way and how they got that way. I found myself frustrated with the choices the characters were making and frustrated with the way they were behaving towards each other. Not frustrated, however, in a way that made me want to put the book down. Susan Choi's writing was impeccable in creating this conflict that got me really on the edge of my seat. I didn't understand why there was so much anger between Louisa and her mom, and I just really felt like I needed to know, and Susan Choi breadcrumbed all the way there. There was something about this book that you could also consider a little bit of a twist. Now, there were some signs that pointed to it, and I saw them and I thought, but then I kind of ignored them because I continued to be swept up in the story. Those signs later turned out to have a payoff that, even though in the beginning of the book I may have thought, okay, I kind of know what this is, I just got completely blindsided by. It wasn't like a mystery thriller twist, but it was a twist that I just wasn't anticipating, and it was a really interesting way to conclude the story. Maybe other people would feel like the twist, as I'm calling it, was obvious, but to me, my suspension of disbelief led me to completely forget about the clues that Susan Choi gave me, and I just fell for it hook, line, and sinker. I actually really enjoyed where the book went from that moment because I wasn't expecting it, but it worked out really well for me as a reader, and I enjoyed the conclusion of the story very much. I also really enjoyed the fact that this was historical fiction that actually didn't feel like historical fiction to me. I felt like I was reading a story about a family and all of their drama, and then there were these little sprinkles that related to the historical fiction. I think that Susan Choi's method of teaching history through this story was really clever because I was so bound to these characters and their fates that I wasn't worried about what was real and what wasn't. In fact, it wasn't until I finished the book that I even thought to look up the scenario that this book was written around and realized, oh wait, yeah, that makes sense. This was real. I walked away feeling like Susan Choi had opened a door in my understanding of history, and I wanted to walk through it and learn more. And that's exactly what I did. So if that was Susan Choi's goal, mission accomplished. The book was narrated by Eunice Wong, who I've listened to many times before. She's not my favorite narrator. I find her a little bit stoic and sometimes even a little bit chippy, if that makes sense. But she does a really great job. I think she kind of added to my perception of the characters in the way that she voiced them and with the attitude that she voiced them. But you know what? If she can add meaning as a narrator, then congrats, because she was really successful in that. This story is about a family tragedy, and I found her tone totally appropriate. When there were moments of joy in the story, I felt she adjusted appropriately. I think overall her narration was strong, even though she's someone who's not really my preference as a narrator. It's just something about her narration that I don't love, maybe the energy of it, yet it fit this book entirely. I would give this book a 4 out of 5 stars, a really solid 4. I'm very impressed with the way that it played with my assumptions. Susan Choi led me on a wild goose chase of what I was listening to, and then she twisted it on me. And I could have known it was coming, and maybe a little piece of me did, yet the way she set it up, I took it. I took the bait, and I was surprised. I found the structure of the alternating timelines really successful. Every time a question came up for me, like, hey, I wonder why this is happening, Susan Choi answered it. She was like 3 steps ahead of me the entire time, and I found that really impressive. I wouldn't be surprised to see this one advance to the shortlist of the Booker Prize, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised to see it win either. Now, granted, this is the only one on the Booker long list I've read so far this year, but clearly this book is being pushed between Barnes & Noble having it front and center and Fable wagging it in my face repeatedly, making sure that I knew that it was something I should read. I'm going to suggest this one to my book club as I think there's a lot to talk about, and it's definitely an interesting read. I love when I can learn while I'm being entertained, and Susan Choi pulled that off masterfully. But remember, you might love what I hate and hate what I love, so make your own opinion. But thanks for listening to mine. I hope you like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. See you next time.